Thank you, Dana. It's amazing that our lives are filled with stories. Oftentimes we relate to stories better. And of course, the book of Genesis, if you notice in the passage that there are lots of stories in this book. We've looked at the story of creation, the story of man and woman, and the story of temptation and the fall. And then last we looked at the story of hatred and anger and what happened between Cain and his brother. And so we look at all these stories and stories that will continue, stories like Abram and Sarah and Isaac and Joseph. And of course the story will begin next week. Noah and this thing called rain that had never happened until it started raining. I think about stories a lot. I had a professor, Dr. McKellar, that would talk about stories and narratives. And I remember as a young child growing up, I studied a lady by the name of Mama Dunaway. Now, Mama had this routine every day. It was the same routine every single day. 10 o'clock, she watched The Price is Right. 11 o'clock, she began to watch her stories. Young and the Restless would come on. Young and the Restless would go off. The news would come on. I would go to sleep. Following the news, Days of Our Lives would come on. And sometimes I'd wake up and figure out what was going on between Marlena and Stefano. And then she would watch Another World. And usually if my nap went like I wanted to, I'd wake up about the time the news went off and Inside Edition came on. Life is filled with stories. But in the majesty of the Word of God, I want to be, you hear me say, there are times when you come to the Word of God that there are passages that are really hard to wrestle with. They're hard to wrap your mind around. The chapters are difficult. Tonight is one of those chapters. Genesis chapter 5, the genealogy of Adam. You're going to preach on genealogy? Yes. Genealogy of Adam. And y'all, I'll tell y'all, I have thought this word was misspelled all day long. I asked Lauren to proofread it. I got on Google because it did not look right. That's the right spelling. The genealogy of Adam, Genesis chapter 5. We're going to read the first 5 verses. Genesis chapter 5, beginning with verse number 1 through verse number 5. If you're there, say amen. Amen. All right, that's the majority. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed and named them man in the day when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years. Hey, 100 years is nothing compared to that. 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now, how many of y'all would like to live 930 years? If I felt good, yes. A couple of things to consider when you look at this chapter. The first thing is that this chapter has a distinct pattern. You'll notice it's something like this. Someone lived X number of years, fathered the one in the next entry, then lived Y more years and fathered sons and daughters, and then would conclude with the total number of years they had lived. You could also break this chapter down into 3 distinct areas. The first is going to deal with the beginning, which is Adam. There's a second area, or 7th panel, as some writers would call, and this is the 7th panel that deals with Enoch. Then ultimately the culmination will end with Noah. You'll see a vertical shift even from Adam to Noah through this passage. And also, genealogy, a vertical list, occurs one other time. We will cover that probably in the last message in this series. And that will be in Genesis chapter 11, which will detail the line that continues to Abram. As we begin this new section, as we look at Genesis chapter 5, there's a couple things we need to be aware of. I've often told you, when you look in Scripture, there's certain things you need to look for. So I'm going to give you Bible Study 101 in about 2 minutes. Are you ready? Buckle up and hang on. Here we go, kids. When you look in Scripture, there's certain things you look for. Key words, big words, repetition. There's a repetition that occurs 8 times in this chapter alone, and it's very simply these words, and he died. It occurs 8 times, verse 5, verse 8, verse 11, verse 14, verse 17, verse 20, verse 27, and verse 31. Y'all got those, right? If you didn't get them, I'll give them to you after class. And he died. Some would ask, remember back in Genesis 2 when God told them, if you touch the specific tree, what will happen? Okay, so you were paying attention. Good. This means yes, this means no. You die. Some would argue, did God mean what he said? When you look in chapter 5, you can begin to see that God meant exactly what he said. There's 2 other distinct things we'll look at tonight. One is the fact that there's a man that is mentioned who walked with God. And there's also another man who we'll meet at the end that we'll use to catapult us into the next couple weeks. So we ask the question tonight. Here's the first question. As we walk through this, what is our purpose? When you look at Genesis chapter 5 and you look at the genealogy of Adam, you ask the question, what is our purpose? Church, there's a number of ways that this chapter could be handled. One effective way would be to treat it in an extended introduction that the predominant theme of death, the pattern of names and formulas, and the purposes as a link from Adam to Noah, and we divide it into 3 distinct sections. In the first section, the writer shows God's intention for the human race by repeating themes from the creation account. Remember in verse 1, this is the book of generations of Adam in the day when God created man. Now how much of this sounds familiar? God created man. He made him in the likeness of God. It's the same thing in chapter 2. In the beginning, God created, and then God created man in the image of God, comma, in the image of God, God created man. And so you see the repetitiveness here. The narration begins with the blessing of Adam and the image of God as God had created and designed man to be. And the image involved here is then passed on to his son, for Seth was the image of his father. I understand that. I have a mini-me. He looks just like me. He acts just like me. I don't deny it sometimes. But the spiritual capacities that were imparted to Adam and Eve endowed them with the ability and the responsibility to represent God on earth. Remember, that was designed by God. That was a purpose, was to represent God. Can I tell you something today? Let's chase a squirrel for a second. By the way, the other day, this is just a side note. The other day we were driving home from Birmingham. I don't know where it was, have no clue, but there's a sign that says, look, a squirrel. And it's a billboard on the side of the interstate. Carl, I thought about you. Can I tell you something tonight? You were created and designed by God Almighty for one thing. And that is to receive glory given to Him. Your life is to glorify Him. That's why you exist. That's why you and I are here, is to glorify God in every single thing that we do. That's the purpose. Even in a cursed world, human beings, I want you to hear this. Even in a cursed world, human beings are in God's image and may serve Him and enjoy His blessing. We're in Genesis chapter 5. The fall of man has already occurred. We live in a fallen world. Man is still the image of God. Every person has the right to display God. You're designed, created, formed by God. Every one of us are unique. We're different, but yet we're all created in the same image. And yet we see in verse 5, Saw the days that Adam lived were 930 years, comma, and he died. Also, Paul would write to the church at Rome and say these words, that by one man sin entered the world, and death by sin. What is our purpose? Secondly, what is our responsibility? When you walk through this passage and you walk through this chapter, and again, I know this is a different take on genealogy. It's a tough chapter, but what is our responsibility? The second section that has an additional interpretive material deals with Enoch, the seventh from Adam. And what is so unique about Enoch is this. Look at verse 21. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Thank you, Dana, for introducing us to Methuselah. Now, if you have your pens, highlighters, I need you to mark verse 22. Then Enoch walked with God. How many years? Somebody. 300 years. Now, I don't know about y'all. That's a long time. Now, I've heard the old saying, now, Brother Jeff, you know that time then is not the same as now. I learned a word in Greek class. But this is not the New Testament, so they had to transliterate it into Hebrew. And a word for that is baloney. The text tells us that Enoch walked with God. Now, before you ask, what does that mean? I don't know. Well, wait a second. You're the preacher, you don't know? I'm going to tell you what the text says. The text says that he walked with God. Do I believe that Enoch had fellowship with God? Yes. Do I believe that Enoch had a close relationship with God? Absolutely. Does that mean that God and Enoch walked hand in hand down the beach? I don't know, but I know this. I know what the text is saying, and Enoch had a special relationship with God apart from anybody else. And there's a lot of other evidence that would support that. Enoch walked with God. So the question tonight, church, is this. Are you walking with God? And if God left you on this earth for 300 years, and you outlive all of us, would you walk with God every day? Church life's hard. Things happen. Bad things happen to good people. And because you're a Christian does not make you immune to struggles. It's a little harder. But would you walk with God? No matter what the circumstances, no matter what the cost. Enoch would serve as God's spokesperson. And we also know that there's something else unique about Enoch we'll look at in a second. The second thing is this. In this chapter, Enoch is the only person that does not die. The text says he's taken away. Now, to paint the picture, to draw the comparison, to kind of get you an idea of what that looked like, remember Elijah, who was carried away? It's the same idea. And because Enoch walked with God, he didn't die. Some preaching professors and others will tell you there are certain things that you need to do in a message. And if you've ever watched Billy Graham preach, there's one thing that Billy Graham does better than I cannot emulate it. I'm sorry, I'm not Billy Graham. But one thing Billy Graham does is he always beelines to the cross as quick as he can. So now let's bring it home for a second. If you walk with Christ and you fellowship with Christ, you're not going to die either. A second death. Let's be theologically correct here. There may be a first death. You may leave this earth. But you will not die the second death. What is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to walk with God. Now, how do we apply this? How do we leave here, Brother Jeff, and put this into practice tomorrow morning? How do we do this Friday, Saturday, Sunday? How do we put this into practice? Well, there are multiple ways that you can walk with God. Here's a couple. And I will tell you, this is not deeply theological, not deeply doctrinal. This is very practical. The first thing is simply this. You got to spend time in prayer and Bible study. You've got to spend time with Him. There is important things, and I understand life happens, but you cannot afford not to spend time with the Father. And you cannot afford to not spend time praying and spending time in His Word. Now, some ask, well, Brother Jeff, what do I read? I mean, church, I've had folks walk into my office and tell me, Brother Jeff, I know that I'm supposed to read the Bible, but I don't know where to start. Here's 3 books. Psalms, Proverbs, and the Gospel of John. John is the easiest gospel for to understand. Proverbs says 31 Proverbs, whatever day of the week it is. Today is 8th. You read Proverbs 8. Tomorrow you read Proverbs 9. Now, Dan, I know there's one in every crowd. No, what do I do for months that only have 29 or 30 days? What I do? Then you read 2. A second way to walk with God is to be involved in church. To be involved in worship, to be involved in small groups, to be involved in that fellowship that will help sharpen you, equip you to grow. Those are keys to walking with God. Those are keys to spending time with Him. And so the question, again, as we now go to the last question, are you walking with Him? And if you're not, what's stopping you? What's hindering you? So, Brother Jeff, what do you mean? I tell my girls all the time, I can't fix anything if I don't know it's broken. I can't work the TV if the dog has chewed the remote. I can't work the TV if Cohen threw the remote and the remote went this way and the batteries went that way. I can't fix that if I don't know. And the same holds true in your Christian life. You can't fix it if you don't know it's broken, but the fact is sometimes is you have to be willing to be vulnerable, to be transparent, say, God, my walk is not where it needs to be. I need to fix it. And God will show you. What is our hope? What is our responsibility? First thing is, what is our purpose, our responsibility? And thirdly, what is our hope? It has amazed me in the last few years the lack of hopelessness that you see in our world today. The lack of hope that you see in people. The distraught faces, all of that. And as the genealogy, this list comes to the end, we look at the birth of Noah. The text includes the words of Lamech and at the naming of Noah. And he called his name Noah, saying, "This one shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because the ground which the Lord has cursed." They thought Noah was going to be the answer to bring comfort. Now, Hillwood, listen to me for just a second, okay? And I need you to do me a favor. Can y'all do this? This means yes. This means no. Okay. It is easy to get our proverbial cart before our proverbial horse. And it's easy right here at the end of chapter 5 to jump to chapter 6. But we need to stay in chapter 5 right now. Does that make sense? Good. I was worried about that for a second. They really thought that Noah was going to bring comfort. In the next section, life under the curse was very painful. Remember, the curse has fallen on man. And so living under the curse has been very painful. So Lamech had hope for relief and comfort that Noah would bring. But I noticed that one writer said this. And church, I'll tell you, when I read it, I just had to stop. I had to stop. As painful as life under the curse was, here's what one writer says. Human life under the curse was also painful to God. So often, we see the hurt. We see the shape of things around us. And we think it just bothers us. I have to wonder what God sees. And have to wonder what God thinks. The curse of man was just as painful to God. Church, that wasn't what God designed. That wasn't God's intentions. God placed man in a beautiful garden with everything at their disposal. And that was the plan for God, for man to stay there. And as painful as man thought the curse was, it was painful to God too. Let's really paint the picture. Let's fast forward a long way to the Psalms in Psalm 22. In Psalm 22, David says these words. And I'm not going to quote the English. I'm going to quote the Hebrew or the Latin. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's the same words that Jesus would quote on the cross when he felt God the Father look away from him. The curse was just as painful to God. And so God had a plan to use Noah. However, it was not the way Lamech had envisioned. And sometimes, church, please hear me. Sometimes the way we draw it is not the way God draws it. And the plan that God had is not what was envisioned. As we look at this passage again, this may be depressing to some. We're going to think, man, Brother Jeff, that's a good Bible study, but I'm a little down right now, a little sad. We know that Enoch walked with God and escaped the cause of death. We know that Noah was brought to bring comfort under the curse. And so now, how do we tie all this up? How do we put all this together? First, this was God's design. This was God's plan. And if God wants to do something, God doesn't have to ask anybody's permission to do it. He doesn't. Does it look grim? Does it look possibly depressing, defeating? Yes. But can I tell you this in closing? God is still on the throne. And for you and I, the biggest thing we can take away from this tonight is we can draw from the example of Enoch, and that is to walk with God inside a world that needs the light, a city that is dark. And if we're going to push back the darkness with the light of the gospel, then our walk has to match our talk. I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged. I look out, I see a group of adults, big kids. You've got to be careful. Carl told me Sunday I hurt his feelings by telling him he needed to be chaperoned on trips. Well, I agree, Dana. The truth is the truth. But church, I'm encouraged. But God hasn't come back yet. And He hasn't sent the Son to come get us. And so there's still work to be done. There's still work to be done. And the biggest challenge for us is right now is to walk with God and to grow deeper with Him. And as the church grows deeper spiritually, it will then to begin to grow outward. Thank you tonight for your attentiveness. Your being here is an encouragement to me. Again, I know this is a difficult chapter. I knew that coming into this. If there's questions you have, please stop me. I will answer to the very best of my ability. If I don't know, I will tell you I don't know, and we'll find the answer. If I don't have the answer in the books in my office, that's fine. We'll stop. And we'll get on, and as Dr. Brunson says, and I close, we'll stop. We'll get the word out. We'll go to the verse, you have a question, and we'll lay the Bible down, and we'll put our face. Say, okay, God, you wrote the book. What does it say? Questions or comments? That's right. Mm-hmm. Dorothy turned and looked at you kind of smiling. I'm a little concerned. I agree. I agree. I do agree there, Mr. D. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. She just stumped the preacher. That's why I have not responded yet. What she asked is, if Enoch was really carried to heaven, had Enoch sinned, because God cannot allow sin into heaven. Same thing. Yeah. 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 Right. Right. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Make sense? I was trying to wrap my head around that question. Thank you, Larry.
I don't understand what comes to my mind is we're all going to be translated. Amen.
Hmm. Yeah.
So to me, that's what happened to Enoch,
Elijah.
Elijah.
Hmm.
You're translated into heaven, okay? You're, thank goodness we're not going to be like we are today in heaven.
Yeah.
I think the translation is better.
But you don't go to heaven right away. Where are you at all the time?
Yeah. I mean, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Yeah, as Christians. He's God.